Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Andrew Patterson. I'm the CEO of Family Daycare Australia. I've jumped on to welcome you all to today's session of the Online Engagement Series. Before we get underway, I wanted to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands from which we're all joining from today, and to pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. It's my great pleasure to welcome our panellists and guests and our host, Michael Farrell, the Advocacy and Engagement Manager from Family Daycare Australia. And I'm going to hand over to Michael.
Thanks, Andrew. As always, appreciate you joining us to introduce the session. Before we introduce our guest today, do you mind giving us your thoughts on the importance of the role of the educational leader, both broadly and in a family daycare context?
Yeah, sure. Look, I think particularly in the context of family daycare, it is a really interesting and challenging role. I think that many of the things that make family daycare so great and so unique actually make the role of the educational leader pretty challenging in the family daycare context. And I think particularly the sort of hub and spoke model of family daycare. It's, we're not operating in a homogenous single center environment, and the job of the educational leader in that geographically spread family daycare model and context is amplified. And I think the complexity comes also in the fact that there's a continuum of skills and experience in any given service in terms of educators. So the educational leader needs to be flexible and skilled in understanding the capabilities and strengths and weaknesses of their educators. They also need to be able to build those relationships, and there's, I guess, one of the great strengths of family daycare is the uniqueness in the educational and pedagogical approaches of educators. That they're all different. They have the opportunity to sort of shape their programs and the way they run their services and their broad philosophies. And I think that as I said, is one of the core strengths of family daycare, but it's also one of the things that makes the role of the educational leader a lot more difficult. And that geographical spread on top of that, you lose that sort of day-to-day interaction that you get when you work with people in a physical premises on a day-to-day basis. So I guess maintaining the connection between educational leaders and educators over time and over distance, while incorporating all of those individual nuances that come in the family daycare model, I think make this a great subject and a really important role in underpinning and delivering quality in the family daycare context.
Yeah, I think that it's as you said, there's specific and quite unique particular challenges that relate to the inherent structure of family daycare. And I think that it's potentially somewhat evident, I think, when you look at the data around assessment and rating. We know that in terms of the NQS, the educational leadership relates primarily to both Quality Area 7 and Quality Area 1. And these are the two quality areas that family daycare performs least well in. And I think that part of that really ties in with the sort of structural nature of the service itself. It's not necessarily that services are potentially, in some cases more deficient, but I think that there's some unique challenges that sort of present themselves and play out through the structure of family daycare. And I think, obviously as we get into today's topic, we'll cover some of those challenges, but it's also important to look to the strengths of the model in terms of educational leadership. I mean, you spoke about the continuum of skills and experience across, the educators that are registered with any given service, and also the strengths in terms of autonomy of educators in their own individual educational program and practice. So maybe like other care types, there's particular strengths and particular challenges that come with these particular areas. So thanks again for introducing us. And thanks to everyone today for joining us and giving up their time to take part. I have to mention, don't forget these sessions are interactive. So if you have a question, be sure to add it to the comments on our Facebook or YouTube stream. As we've talked about, we're talking about today the role of the educational leader. And we have two amazing guests joining us on the panel who've been generous enough to share their wealth of knowledge on this topic. Our first guest has 12 years experience within the ECEC sector, working with both centre-based and family daycare settings. She's currently the educational leader at Communities at Work Family Daycare in the ACT, and was the recipient of the 2023 Excellence in Family Daycare Coordinator of the Year Award. I'd like to welcome Chamalee Prathiraja. Thanks for joining us, Chamalee.
Thanks, Michael.
To help our viewers get to know you a little better, do you mind just sharing a little bit about yourself, your role, your current role, and your background in family daycare and ECEC more broadly?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much for having me here in this forum today, Michael. As you already know, I'm Chamalee. I have been in the industry for 12 years. I've seen it all from family daycare to center-based care, and I have worn many hats along the way. But it is my great pleasure to say that I've started my career as a family daycare educator, and that is one of the jobs I enjoyed most. Right now, I'm the educational lead at Communities at Work Family Daycare in the ACT. My current role let me use all the skills and knowledge I picked up over the years to make a real difference in our family daycare community.
Yeah, I think it's always great when we have, those in different roles within family daycare that have either broader ECC experience or have been an educator in the past, because I think having, that sort of background gives that personal insight into some of the particular nuances of the role. So I'll just briefly introduce our co-host for today, who's joining us, Lyndall Cotterill. Lyndall has been working with Family Daycare Australia for some time now as a sector liaison coordinator. I'm sure many of you out there have spoken to Lyndall, and was actually also Excellence in Family Daycare Awards winner for National Coordinator of the Year in 2021. So Lyndall, I'll hand over to you to introduce our second panelist.
Thank you. So our second guest has spent 15 years in the EC sector. Majority of the time has been spent within the family daycare sector. She has worked as an educator, a field coordinator, education leader, nominated supervisor, and is now the manager of Coastal Family Daycare in Tasmania. So welcome, Nicole.
Thank you, Lyndall.
That's all right. And thank you for joining us. Would you like to share us a little bit about yourself and obviously the history that you've had in the family daycare sector up to date today?
Sure. So I started in the family daycare sector back when my children were little, and I did start as an educator or relief educator in family daycare for a few years before moving into working at the coordination unit here at Coastal Family Daycare. And I have been here ever since, and as you said, I have worked in many roles within the coordination unit. Here at Coastal, we do also have a couple of small long daycares, but largely worked in family daycare across the entire time of my journey here with Coastal. So yeah, so I've worked in a number of roles, and now working in manager / nominated supervisor role. So I'm currently not the educational leader, but I work very closely with our educational leader, and also being nominated supervisor, that kind of, I guess, comes into that role of educational leader within those responsibilities of quality area 1 and 7 as well. So yeah, so I'm interested in participating today.
Yes. Yeah, well, you do have a wealth of information, and we're very, very excited to have you on today.
Thank you.
Yep. So thank you again for joining us today, and thanks to everyone out there who's watching. As we've sort of already touched on, it's clear that within any ECC setting that educational leadership is incredibly important, and thus, of course, the educational leader is important. I think I find it interesting and quite beneficial, I would say, that there's not a specific qualifications prescribed within the legislative requirement to have an educational leader. I believe the wording around the requirements to be an educational leader is that they need to be suitably qualified or and experienced. So I guess that gives us some freedom of interpretation as to what that means. But it also, I mean, the legislative requirements can be so prescriptive in other ways, which can be a good thing. But I think in this context, it's actually, it does allow for more freedom of interpretation, but it also, I think, potentially causes some confusion, in what constitutes the role of the educational leader. So, Chamalee, do you mind kicking off the discussion by giving us your thoughts on the key expectations from your perspective, and the responsibilities that you have as an educational leader in your role, and what does that look like in your service?
Oh, yes. Well, Michael, I think educational leadership is a multifaceted role, and it changes all the time. It evolves all the time. So I'm expected to be adaptable, flexible, and cope well with changes. And as a leader, I have a vision, and I understand that my vision is sustainable, and it resonates with my family daycare community. And I need to listen and understand and collaborate with the people I work with, and be open to different perspectives, values, and attributes they bring to the service. And build strong, respectful relationships is a must in my role. I think it is my responsibility to earn respect and form a foundation for healthy mutual relationship with the people I work. Without relationship, leadership doesn't exist. My role doesn't exist. That's what I believe. I support myself to build my professional identity. I do this by understanding my values, my beliefs, and my strengths. And I'm confident to showcase my achievements and success to inspire others. So I'm required to foster a culture of continuous learning and reflective practices so that we all can work towards excellence. In my role, I try to be innovative as much as possible and bring different perspectives to the service for continuous improvement. So now we have revised version of frameworks in place, which I think was done meaningfully, thoughtfully, and with lots of research. So it is my responsibility to understand the new changes meaningfully so that I can better support educators with these new changes to frameworks. And if I say in a nutshell, it's all about me being the educational leader, not just doing the task associated with the role. If I say something about work that I do with my service, my main role is to focus on quality area 1, supporting educators to improve program and practices, but I do not like to isolate my role from other quality areas because all 7 quality areas are interconnected. And if we take the essence of each quality area, it is to provide quality education and care. So each quality area is like a puzzle piece. They all work together to make the big picture that we all want, which is supporting children's holistic development. So in my service basically I collaborate across all 7 quality areas. And then educational leadership, of course, goes hand in hand with quality area 1. Through my experience, I have realized that quality area 1 is not something that can be done only for regulatory purposes. It is going beyond mere regulatory compliance. So I support educators to have both their hearts and minds in children's learning, development, and well-being, and delve deeper into children's play for the magic to happen. So that is basically what my role looks like in my service.
Sorry, before I hand to you, Lyndall, it's a really good point. Like, I made the point at the start that there's this sort of idea that, quality area 1, education program practice and governance and leadership are the primary quality areas that relate to educational leadership. But you're 100% right. I mean, there is an intersection with all quality areas if we're talking about our ultimate goals in terms of facilitating the best possible educational developmental outcomes for children. Then of course all the quality areas are important, and playing the role of the educational leader doesn't just relate to those hard and fast aspects of leadership in quality area 7 and those related to educational program practice in quality area 1, because aspects of children's health and safety and the structure of staffing arrangements could also have be important for educators to have a good understanding of if we're going to achieve those best possible outcomes. So sorry to interrupt, Lyndall, but I'll hand back to you.
Oh, I was just going to say that I really feel like you hit the nail on the head. You sort of said that it was a puzzle piece of, all working together to make the magic happen. Essentially, that is the role of the education leader, that you are bringing everything together to make that magic happen. I really loved, that quote that you gave. So, but I guess I also love that you said that you earn respect from the people you work with. And I guess, every educator that you work with, they have a different personality, different learning style. They have their own unique strengths. And I love that you said that you have to get to know your own strengths as well as an educational leader. So, I guess, all of those encompass, I guess, why, you're so successful in the role that you're playing, that you're doing with your educators in your service. So, yeah. Nicole, I'm curious to know what qualities you feel would make someone, would help someone in becoming a successful educational leader.
Yeah, so again, I think it is about leaders knowing themselves as leaders, to really know who you are, what your philosophy is, what your beliefs and values are, and being really confident in that. And then moving into more the educational leader role. So also about knowing the national quality framework or the national quality standards and the curriculum that you're working with to bring all of that together. And then I guess delving even deeper into that, once you know yourself, I think it's really critical when we're looking at family daycare that we are working also with educators that are running their own businesses. So it's not maybe as straightforward as being a leader or an educational leader in another service where things are done in a particular way, because in family daycare, educators are, or in our service, and I think in a lot of other services as well, in most of the time are running their own businesses. So, and one of the draw cards to becoming a family daycare educator may be that you have that flexibility to look at what theorists you really relate to and incorporate that into your business, or look at, what your beliefs and philosophies are and incorporate them into your business. So I think in family daycare, in order to be a good leader, you almost have to be a good follower as well, because you have to be able to see other people's visions and build those relationships and really go on the journey with other people while still being a leader, but really listening to others.
Yeah, I really love that. You know, to be a good leader, you do need to be a good follower, and you do need to see that vision and then adapt that vision to, you know, enhance what they're already currently doing. So yeah, it's definitely that relationship, and it's also about yourself, you know, staying on top of, I think you said, being confident in yourself as a leader as well. You know, if you you know, are confident in the ability and you know, your skill level as well, and knowing what to say to educators to adapt them and to make them be flexible with their programming practice. You know, it all works together to be a team and a great relationship unity. Yeah.
So, Chamalee, I think sort of just touching on some of those qualities that both of you have mentioned, you know, reflecting on the importance of relationships and leaders having a good understanding of themselves and their vision, having confidence, knowing the NQS and the various relevant frameworks like the EYLF, you mentioned and the NQF very well, having flexibility and things like that. Just reflecting on some of those qualities, how would you describe yourself as a leader, and what qualities influence your vision and leadership style?
Yes. Well, if I say something about my leadership style, I would like to describe myself as a leader with a growth mindset. I love fostering a culture of reflection, continuous learning, and resilience, which is in line with my vision. I never think I'm an expert, but what I believe is when you think you are an expert, you miss out on chances to learn. And Nicole also said something very similar to what I'm going to say now. Nicole said, understanding your skill levels. I think that is very important. So I'm very good at finding my knowledge gap, and it helps me a lot to stay curious and keep getting better, fostering a culture of lifelong learning.
Yeah, I think you really sort of made an important point there. I mean, you need to have a good understanding of yourself in terms of the gaps. You know, it was you can't be a good leader unless you can acknowledge the fact that we all have gaps in our knowledge. And you talked about, if you think of yourself as an expert at everything, you miss out on the chance to learn. And being good at being self-reflective and understanding what those potential gaps are is obviously really important in a leader, and therefore actively pursuing opportunities to sort of fill in those gaps as being really important. So that's a really good point. Just a final question for this topic. Nicole, in your opinion, how would someone develop and communicate a clear vision as an educational leader, and how could they align that vision to inspire and motivate their team?
Yeah, I think setting clear expectations. So, you know, we have a number of tools to do that. We have the legislation, and all the tools that we have within the NQF and that CEQA and Family Daycare Australia give us, and we also have our own policies and procedures and things like that. So I think really setting some clear expectations or goals are really important to sort of help you, I guess, have a clear vision of where you want to get to or what that expectation is in your service. But then as far as having one direct vision, I think that needs to be like from a team. So as I said before, family daycare is quite different to other services because we do have people that are running their own businesses, and I think it's really important to really think about that when we're setting vision. So, you know, it shouldn't be just one person's vision. It should really be a shared vision, as long as we've got those benchmarks or expectations set that are really important that we follow. And then I think building our vision on from those as a team is really important. I think it's also, just really crucial to just think about those relationships, buildings and things like that when we are thinking of a vision, because if we're taking everybody on that journey with us and it is a shared vision, and that might not just be with the educators but families and children as well, to really get the best outcomes for everybody within the sector.
Yeah, I mean, you go back to one of the sort of central points that Andrew introduced, and we all in these sorts of contexts know that that's one of the key aspects of the unique nature of family daycare. So you talked about setting clear expectations is important, and does that mean that there should or is one direct or set vision across the span of the service? But then, as you said, educators have running their own business, they have that autonomy both in their own educational program practice and their own philosophy that should be tying in with the service's broader educational philosophy. It can't necessarily be one set vision, but there could be aspects of having a shared vision that span across those two different, or not two different levels, but the different contexts, I guess, an educator context and a service-wide context. Lyndall, do you have any thoughts on that?
Look, I think she did very well in her answer, but you do have your shared vision. I guess, you have a vision as a service, what you want, it generally aligns with your philosophy that you've got as well within your service. You set goals for achieving that, and then obviously then you go and build those relationships with those educators, and then put in different goals for them to achieve that outcome overall, to align to that philosophy that you have in your service. So I guess that it is very hard. It can be a challenging job to do, to pull in all those aspects as an educational leader, while still enhancing quality and also having innovative thinking. But it is one when you do take on that role that you, as an educational leader, put in place. I
think we just going back to Nicole, what you said around clear expectations. I think it's really important consideration in leadership more generally. It's not possible to lead a team in any context, really, if there's not clear expectations around particular roles or particular requirements. So I think that's a really important consideration. But obviously, again, it goes back to the point that, yes, we need clear expectations, but we also, both of you spoke about the importance of having flexibility in how that's applied across the service. So it really is, it's sort of this two-sided conundrum, really, in the same way that there's not necessarily clarity within or around the expectations of what constitutes the role of an educational leader in both a legislative context or within the context of the NQS. But when we speak to what's required in that leadership capacity, then those leaders do need to have clarity around what that means, but also flexibility in how they implement it. So I'll move into the next topic, and that's around building a professional identity as an educational leader. So before we discuss with Chamalee and Nicole more broadly, Lyndall, did you have anything you want to mention about the importance of continuous learning for educational leaders and how being a leader can be difficult to come to grips with for some?
Yeah, so I guess we've sort of touched on it and sort of noted that you do need to have strong communication skills, empathy, be adaptable, and have that commitment for continuous learning. I guess all these qualities allow you to stay current with latest research and best practices as well, so that you can tailor those conversations to suit the abilities and needs of the educators and the colleagues in your team. So I guess more importantly, that also fosters your personal growth and development as well, which, that continuous learning helps us as an education leader to adapt to new challenges, inspires our teams and to build that culture of excellence and innovation. So I guess it's not always easy, and like I said, many do get daunted taking on that role. And I guess I know myself, I was, and probably both of you are in the same boat, we're people persons, people. So I was aware of my strengths and weaknesses as well. So I guess I encouraged my educators and staff to also look at their strengths. I used the VIA character strengths test. I used to come running at them and they used to go, oh, not again. But if I knew their strengths and they could identify their own strengths as well, it was that journey that we had. So my strengths for me was that I had a love of learning, and that I had leadership skills and social intelligence. They were my top strengths. So building on that professional identity, I knew that being an education leader therefore was the right role for me, probably just as a sector liaison coordinator is now as well. But then I could also obviously, use that to my advantage by having that devotion and that passion for that job that I was, engaged in. So I had that willingness to listen, to learn and grow and to adapt, and then put that into the role of the educators that I was, helping and assisting and mentoring and supporting. But I also see that leadership's not all about innovation and possibilities. I guess it is building on that person's self-esteem and confidence as well, for them to get that I got it moment. So, it can be challenging, but it can be rewarding. And I think what we also said as well was that being a great leader also means you are a great learner as well. So I think all of that, as an educational leader, that's the importance of that continuous learning within yourself as well, to have that dedication for the job.
Yeah, and I think the other point around, the importance of how this role works within an ECEC setting, you talked about the willingness to listen. It's for leaders to be successful at what they do and gain the respect of others, that the respect that's required to execute their role well. You do need to have that willingness to listen and be able to reflect on yourself and your own strengths and weaknesses, and also, comes back to that, the importance again in that you've sort of all touched on around communication. Obviously, that's so key. That the importance of relationships more broadly within family daycare is very important, but communication back and forth and having that willingness to listen and letting that feed into your own self-reflection is really important. So, Chamalee, for yourself, what are some ways that you could continually expand your knowledge to stay current in the field?
Yeah, there are about 12 ECEC services, center-based services attached to my service. So I attend regular networking sessions with the educational leaders from center-based care. So through these networking sessions, I realized the invaluable knowledge you gain from networking with people in the same sector. And then I attend professional development sessions, conferences, seminars, and I have both formal and informal meetings with the support team where we brainstorm and share our ideas. And then I stay tuned with communications from regulatory authorities and Family Daycare Australia. And I also gain a lot of knowledge by reading articles published by National Educational Leader on ACQA website. And I must say I'm a big fan of Rhonda Livingstone. And if you're a new educational leader, please head straight to ACQA website and access the relevant articles, and they are very insightful. Yeah, so that's how I stay current and current in the field, networking. I love networking with people and see the different perspectives that other people have, and it supports me to learn and unlearn my practices. Yeah.
So you touched on, again, something interesting there. I think it should potentially be acknowledged within the family daycare context. I think, you know, in your particular context, you're quite lucky to have, you know, the larger service across various service types. You mentioned there's 12 centre-based services attached to communities at work, and you really, you know, relish that opportunity to or value working with colleagues within those settings. And then you spoke to the importance of networking and why that's important for you professionally. I'll throw it just open to anyone. Would you have any guidance for those services that may not be attached to other service types for a start, or any insights into things that family daycare that we could learn within our sector that come from those opportunities that you're talking about, in terms of, you know, networking with other colleagues across the sector?
Yeah, I think there are a few Facebook groups, and I'm in part of those Facebook groups, but I'm there to mainly to see other people's perspectives. I'm not very active, but I think if you make some effort to network with, doesn't matter whether the EC services are attached to your organization or not, just trying to see possibilities whether they are willing to, you know, network and have some sort of a, you know, like a small networking sessions. So it doesn't matter whether they are family daycare or center-based care. It's just the supporting each other to learn from each other.
And
Yeah.
for me, if I can just jump in, so in Tasmania, we have the Family Daycare Council Tasmania group. So we meet a few times a year, I think usually 4 times a year, as leaders to discuss what's happening in our services in Tasmania. And we also have groups that are networking groups that are across all EC services in each location. So there's networking meetings for leaders that are organised by a group of people where lots of leaders from all different services meet on occasions, as well as that sort of social media networking as well. And then our educators tend to network in their groups as well, and may come together with questions for the educational leader or leaders within the group that we can take somewhere else.
Yeah, so there's opportunities. I mean, we speak often about the structure of family daycare, in particular for educators in isolation sometimes, just inherent within the structure of the service. But it seems like more and more these days leveraging technology to network is obviously common these days. But from a leadership perspective, or an educational leadership perspective, it seems to be particularly important because, again, you need to be across what's current. Speaking before, Chamalee, you mentioned around, changes to the frameworks. Obviously, to lead educators in having a better understanding of what the requirements might be, or what the shifts are, and what the implications are for practice, that we, in those leadership roles, we need to be across those. But I think we'll talk more about that a bit later. But Nicole, I just want to ask, in terms of an educational leader, obviously you need to be working with a variety of people. Andrew spoke before about the spectrum of capacity of educators in particular. So what advice would you give to educational leaders on how they can work effectively with different personalities, both colleagues and, within the service itself or educators, and how they could adapt their leadership approach if necessary to be innovative in the delivery?
So I think firstly it's important to sort of, some advice that I would give educational leaders or leaders in general is that you don't have to have all the answers, that you just probably need to know where to go to get them. So having those tools there handy when you need them, but not necessarily needing to have the answers to every question, because we won't always have the answers, and depending on the context of the question, it may be slightly different in how we answer it, but it is important to know where to go to get that information. And then as far as working with varieties of people, I think at our service we tend to try and work on more of a strengths-based approach, so really identifying strengths. When we're having conversations or crucial conversations, coming back to that sort of sandwich model as well, so that you're looking at strengths as well as some of the things that may need to be improved on. And then also just working as in a collaborative leadership model. So again, that listening, I think listening is one of the most important things that we can do. So as a leader working collaboratively with others, we may have something to discuss or something, we may have a vision where we want to get to, but really listening to others on their points of view and their ideas on how to get there as well is really important. So I guess that's some advice that I would give to educational leaders or new educational leaders, people coming into that position. And also I think there is sometimes a bit of a, misinterpretation on what an educational leader does. So just really knowing what an educational leader is for you, or what your job as an educational leader in your service entails. What does your job description say? What does the legislation say? I think Chamalee mentioned before about the new stuff to do with educational leaders, and we've got the toolkits, the books that are from ASEQA to guide us on what an educational leader is. So just understanding some of that stuff in your role, and just being really confident with that when you take that forward to work with others, knowing who you are as a leader. I think I said that before, but as educational leader, it's about motivating, inspiring and leading, or seeing others' visions and being able to help them expand those visions more, or bring it back to meet a particular outcome or a particular part of the NQS. So, really focusing on that more so than, I guess, an educational leader role around that quality area one. Programming, documentation stuff as well. I think it's bigger than that. So, just really knowing what your role entails, and then taking that with you and working with people.
Thanks, Nicole. I loved what you said there. You said you don't have to have all the answers. Being open to new ideas and thinking critically and problem solving as well. Experimenting with the successes and failures, I guess, of responses that educators give you. You're not going to have all those answers all at once, but it is that path that you take. To like you said, have that collaborative leadership modeling where you're listening and experimenting with those with the information that you're given. So I think you really displayed a real collection, I guess, of qualities that you could have within an educational leader role. I'm interested to hear, I guess, from both of you about how you strike a balance between leading and managing, whilst still fostering a sense of that team culture within your service. Chamalee, did you have any thoughts on this?
Yes, Lyndall. I believe in being open, honest, and factual here. For let's say, for an example, I know I notice an educator who could do better in improving the environment. What I do is I first chat with our support team to get a clear picture, from their perspective as well. Then we sit down with the educator, talked about the expectations of the national quality framework, national quality standards, and what we expect as a service. And it is not just about setting expectations, it's about figuring out how we can work together to make things better, giving the educator the feeling that they are supported, not just managed. I think it's all about finding the right spot between managing and leading and probably supporting as well.
And Nicole, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I think very, very similar response really to that question. I think managing and leading can go quite hand in hand. But when we're leading, I guess it's about sharing knowledge and learning ourselves as well on that journey, because we are always learning from others as well. But like Chamalee said, I think setting those really clear expectations as well and having those conversations is really important. So I think the question around, between managing and leading, I think they do sometimes overlap or interrelate to each other, those two things, but having a good balance of two, but also, sharing knowledge and learning ourselves along the way is really important.
Yeah, it's a good point to make. I mean, there is a difference between managing and leading, and it's not, when we're talking about this specific role across all sort of care type settings, it's not just about managing and ensuring that educators have an understanding of their obligations, or an understanding of exactly what each different element under the NQS might be verbatim, but leading. You said, Chamalee, make sure that educators are supported, not just managed. It's really that, I think, goes to the heart of thinking about what's different in talking about some of the nuances of differences between, management and leadership. And also, like, what you said, Chamalee, your opening around the importance of being open, honest, and factual. I think there's a certain amount of respect that's garnered if you can achieve being open, honest, and factual in potentially having some difficult conversations around things that need to be improved from a pedagogical point of view, or whether it's to do with an environment, or perhaps a misunderstanding of what some obligations might be. But doing that in a considered and supportive manner shows good leadership, I think. So that was a really good point. Lyndall, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, and I guess, in the family daycare, it is different to centre-based care. You are an education leader that might see an educator once every month, or, for an education leader, it might even be longer. It might be 6 months. So because, you're delegating to coordinators to also, help a mentor and support that educator as well. So, I guess it's about building that autonomy in that educator as well, rather than just managing and being a director, I guess. So it's about delegating the tasks as well, because you are, you're a team. You're building that educator to improve the outcomes of the children and their learning environment, and and fostering that positive, inclusive culture among every person within your service. So so I guess that in family daycare especially, it's very hard to be an educational leader to manage, and I guess that's why that support, like you said, comes in hand, sharing that knowledge around as well. So it's
important, what you're saying around building, considerations around family daycare specifically. It really is important around that focus on building autonomy within educators. As you said, there's as opposed to a centre-based setting, perhaps when staff are, regularly interacting within the same environment under one roof, there is more opportunities for those day-to-day interactions that, you could potentially rely on your colleague that's in another room to assist you to do, or to mentor educators that might require it. So within the family daycare context, that educational leadership, inherently requires that building autonomy within educators should be a particular focus, which is challenging, again, due to the sort of diffuse nature of the service type itself. So I'll just remind viewers that just before we move on to our final topic, don't forget, if you have a question that you'd like the panel to discuss at the end of this particular final topic, please add it to the comments. Our last topic for today is the planning cycle and reflective practice. Obviously, both are topics that we could comfortably cover as episodes in their own right. So for the purposes of this session, we'll take a quite high level look at these particular topics. So Nicole, to you first, what processes do you use to support a culture of reflective practice in your service, and how can you lead and support a culture of reflective practice in others? And we're going sort of back to the previous point around building autonomy.
Yeah, so I guess building reflective practice using things like crucial or critical conversations and conversations that get people thinking into that critical sort of reflective space. I guess in our service we really encourage reflective practice and critical reflection, and writing that down in a number of ways. Sometimes through our documentation for children, obviously we're using critical reflection and reflective practices there when we go to do those programming tasks. We also use critical reflective journaling with our educators. It's not something that we say they must do, but it's something that we provide in their sort of toolkit for them to be able to use and be able to write in their own reflective journal, I guess, on their own practices and things like that. To really, I guess, get that critical reflection coming in. We do use critical reflection sort of more generalised a lot in our field visits and our visits with our educators, but also in our service in staff meetings and educator meetings, educator training days that we provide. We try and really encourage a lot of big group critical reflection or reflective practice throughout things such as training days, and that when we've got lots of educators together, so putting in reflective questions. We also send out bulletins weekly for our educators and our staff, and within those bulletins we include reflective questions, so just a question or two that go in each bulletin, unless we've got loads of other information to share, but we do try and get a reflective question or two in each one that just encourages educators to think about their own practices or something relating to the NQF, for people to really sort of reflect on and think about how that is for them as well. So just really encouraging a lot of reflective practice through a number of different ways, I guess, within our service. And then through visits.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I was just wondering, the reflective journals, do they have specific prompters around how to reflect on certain things, or how is that sort of structured, or is there just guidance given around how to use that specific tool itself?
So it does have guidance in it. We have also done trainings on reflective practice or critical reflection. But the journals themselves, they are journals that we haven't made up. We did purchase them for every educator. And they're done in monthly sections. So there's room for just general jottings, but there's also some prompts in there to get educators to think about some different topics to reflect on every month, and how they do it in their service, but also their own practices around the topics that they're talking about. So, for instance, if it's a topic that might be around reflecting on your environment, it's not just about the environment, it's about who you are as an educator. So some of that personal critical reflection in there as well as an educator. Is it your philosophy that has your environment set up like that? Is it the theorists that you might be following or relating to? Is it the children's interests? So really just giving some ideas of what types of things you might be reflecting on, and I guess every educator is different. So doing those ones by yourself in your journal is probably, a nice way to reflect personally. And then in more of our group type settings, it's more about more group reflective type stuff of what we do as a service.
And you've noted a couple of times that you've got a toolkit that you give educators. Is that something you give on when they're onboarding, or is it something that they just sort of have? And then if what would be in that toolkit that you're sort of giving?
We do have an onboarding toolkit. So a prospective educator, when they come to us, get a range of information, and then we have a bag of what we call our toolkit, really, that is given out to every new educator, and then that just builds along their journey with us with what sort of things go into that.
Yeah, I think we sort of focus on reflective practice in this context because it really is, when we're speaking about before things like continuous improvement, assessing our own strengths and weaknesses, having open, honest and factual conversations that may result in having to explore, potential weaknesses in practice or understanding of certain requirements. All of these important things that we've already touched on in the conversation so far really come back to why reflective practice is so important. And I guess, would we then say that, reflective practice and critical reflection is potentially one of the key cornerstones of a good educational leader, and being able to navigate that within their own professional sort of context and then across the service itself? Would that be a fair statement?
I think so, and I think it does come back to that. Again, I mentioned listening a lot, but if we're going out with some questions and we're questioning things, or we're getting educators or colleagues to question their own practices, if we're really listening, then we can guide and expand the outcomes that we're going to reach, because we can hopefully, extend those things to reach better outcomes. So yeah, but I do think, Michael, that yes, reflecting on anything that we do is important to improve. If that's
Yeah, I think for me, it's always standing out. I've probably said it in these contexts before, but it does particularly stand out to me when we're talking about like using the evidence at hand in terms of NQS quality ratings and things like that. We actually, we know that element 1.3.2 critical reflection is the single area in which, or a single element in which family daycare performs the least well. And again, it goes back to the fact that it potentially has, something to do with the structural nature of the service itself, and that's why FDCA some time ago focused on that particular area, because we saw it as an area that really needed to be explored and improved upon. So I think it seems to me to be a particularly important consideration in relation to educational leadership, because it can span having a good understanding or good practice support tools like journals and training around what critical reflection means and how to practically do it in different contexts. I think is really, really important. And hopefully over time, as we as a sector acknowledge these issues and improve in these particular areas, hopefully we see those the numbers of services that are rated meeting and above in that particular element itself going up over time, which we are seeing more broadly across the sector. We're now at around in terms of overall ratings, we're now at 70% of services at meeting or exceeding. That's not to say that services are working towards are not necessarily good services. I mean, it's just that we can see that over time, the improvement in those quality ratings overall, and I think that speaks to the fact that we do have a better understanding as time goes on about the importance of and more data around what's actually important for us as a care type to focus on. So, Chamalee, just before we move on, can I ask you, before we move on from this topic, how would you guide, the sort of reflection dialogue with colleagues as the educational leader within your service?
Yes, we guide reactive and proactive forms of conversations with educators. For proactive form of reflection, we use reflection prompts from ACEA website and ECA provocations guides, and we tailor those reflective questions according to educators' knowledge and experience. This happens during the visits, and when we do reactive forms of dialogues, we do them again during the visits and asking open-ended questions from the educators, such as like, how did children respond to that activity? What did you observe about the children's interest? What is something challenging you right now? So, and also through screening the environment, sometimes we prompt reflective dialogues. But what I find is quite often that when reflective dialogues are embedded into practices, it seamlessly happens without even knowing, seamlessly happens. So I think that is the level that we should reach. It's embedded. The reflective dialogues should be embedded into daily practices.
Yeah, I think that's a really, neat and simple way to think about how to navigate the sort of tricky area of promoting critical reflection. There's opportunities within daily practice to approach it in a proactive manner, where you can rely on those resources that are out there and proactively engage with educators or colleagues within the service itself around around a particular dialogue, around a particular topic. But it's, like you said, it's probably really equally important to be able to have the skill set to engage in those reactive prompts for dialogue around, things that occur on visits or things, if you're having a meeting of across the team in its entirety, and we're talking about a particular topic and someone gives an example of something that happened the other day, and then having the skills to actually reactively promote appropriate sort of considerations in the dialogue around those particular topics. I think that's really important. Lyndall, did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I do. I guess within family daycare, we're always engaging in conversations. And like Chamalee said, we're embedding it on a daily basis. Usually, you've got coordinators going out to visit, educators engaging conversations. They would come back to the service. You're engaging in the conversation with the service manager on what happened. So I guess most of the time it is always embedded into family daycare. It's just people don't know how that looks. And when they're asked that question, what's your critical, how are you engaging in critical reflection? Because it is so embedded in the daily activities, people don't know how to portray that. So, I guess realizing that and having that reflective practice on how it's being embedded, as well as that proactive, toolkit, resources, reflection that you take, I think, it's very worthwhile to put that down on paper so that you can show how you're doing that in your service. And I think, once you know how to talk the talk in what that reflective practice looks like in family daycare services, I think overall, would probably improve in that area, because we do it on a regular basis. I do it as a sector liaison coordinator. So many people ring me. That's another form of reflective practice that they're seeking advice from us. So it's just that it's not being put down anywhere as or documented as a practice that they're engaging in. So but yeah, I feel like family daycare, it's all we do is have those conversations and reflect constantly on every practice and change or regulation that comes in. But I also I loved that, Nicole, you said the journaling and part of that toolkit that you have is not something that you make the educators do. So it's not that I guess it comes back to that question of managing and being a leader. You're giving them that toolkit to support strategies in how to do this, and it's not making it a chore for them to worry, I've got to do that. So I really loved that you said it wasn't something that you make them do as well.
Before we just move on, I think you make a good point there, Lyndall, that this type of reflection sort of it's embedded in daily activities, I think is what you said. But we as a sector, or some individuals within the sector, don't necessarily know how to engage in the more documentation side of things around reflection. But I guess from a regulatory point of view, and which feeds into A&R and into the quality improvement plans and things like that, documenting this type of reflection is important. So my question therefore would be, do you have across the board, does anyone have particular tips about how we can, coalesce that sort of inherent, reflection that occurs in day-to-day conversations, or those dialogues that we were talking about, and getting that into a documented form, but without adding additional administrative burden? Do we have any thoughts on that?
I'll go if you like. I was thinking my thoughts were more going to, I think I mentioned when I was talking about critical reflection, that educators do that within their documentation. So it's just part of what they're already doing. It is embedded in what they're doing in that sense. And then within the field visits, or visits that happen between the education leader and the educators, we use field visit forms. And so those questions are actually, if there's been conversations that include critical or reflective questioning, they would be in the field notes. So if we were to get a visit or an A&R visit, if we were looking for reflective questioning, and we have used it within our A&R before, using those field visit documentations to provide the critical conversations or reflective conversations that happen between educators and coordinators or educational leaders, is something that we would use.
It's a good point. That I wonder. Would you say that is it common practice across the sector that we have sort of those standardized field visit forms? Would that be fair to say that would be common practice, Nicole, do you think?
I think so. I think I'm not sure nationally, but I think in Tasmania, when we meet as a family daycare council, it is generally something that is kind of done, whether it's by a paper-based form or lots of the digital platforms or databases actually do have areas for field documentation to go in that both educators and coordinators can see as well.
Lyndall, do you want to take us into the final point for discussion?
Final point. Yeah, so we do have the final point for discussion today, and I am interested to hear from both of you. What processes or systems do you have in place to drive continuous improvement in your service? Nicole, did you want to share your thoughts first?
Yeah, sure. So continuous improvement, obviously we've touched on a lot of these things as well before, and I talked about some of them in the critical reflective sort of question, but staff meetings and just those general conversations and things like that happen can drive improvement, continuous improvement. Also any incidents or anything like that happens may drive improvement, changes to regulation or legislation. All of those things would drive that improvement or continuous improvement. And then obviously with our quality improvement plans, I think our educators all have their own, I'm not sure if all services sort of do this, but our educators have their own quality improvement plan. So every educator has a quality improvement plan, and then coordinators or educational leaders will monitor those and then feedback things through to the coordination unit, where we will put that on our coordination unit quality improvement plan if we're seeing lots of improvement needed in particular areas, or the same sorts of sort of common themes happening along or among individual educator quality improvement plans. And then also what we have at our service is a strategic plan set by our board, because we're community run. And so our board set, it's typically like a strategic plan, but that is also done in the format of a quality improvement plan. So the three of them kind of feed each other on a bit of a continuum. So I guess the educator one feeds the coordination unit one, which feeds the board one, and then in turn that feeds back as well from the board through to the educators. So I'm not sure how that typically looks in other services, but we sort of have three that work together.
So I guess that's a very good example of how that vision across in your case 3 levels is developing, in your service. So wow. Yeah. And Chamalee, do you have anything you would like to add?
Yeah, sure. We look at A&R visits very positively and take feedback on board for continuous improvement. And it is the same with any compliance audits done by the department. We think that they are very positive experiences for continuous improvement. And we do regular parent contacts via email or phone, and we send out service to parents, and parents have access to our online portal and forward their feedback anytime they want. They do not have to wait till we reach out to them. And we take feedback from educators, and we have educators networking sessions, surveys, and we do not have individual quality improvement plan for educators, but we do have action plans for the areas of improvement, and continuously supported and monitored by the coordination team. And we use visit reports and finding from annual safety checks to reflect and find areas of improvement. And we incorporate all these areas of improvement in our quality improvement plan and also our strategic inclusion plan.
Wow.
So Chamalee, there's individual action plans for educators. Would that be around primarily focused on like pedagogical practice and strategies, or is it more of a sort of holistic action plan? And what does
Yes,
that
it's more across all 7 quality areas. Like if we find out an area of improvement, we further support the educator with having an action plan in place. So we support educator giving some ideas for improvement, and also it sort of give the idea to the educator that the educator is not on doing improvements on her own, but with a lot of support from us as well. And we capture, during month visits, we capture how far the educator has improved in each area.
Yeah, that's a nice. That's a good way to both, I guess, document and actively, take and support action for those particular educators, and it gives them something, I guess, tangible to refer back to. So I think that's a good strategy in terms of what we were speaking about before around the sort of dispersed nature of the family daycare as a service type across all the individual settings where education care is actually taking place, to actually have an individual action plan for an educator that spans the NQS quality areas. It's a really good strategy, I think, and speaks to the sort of importance of taking a holistic look at educational leadership. So I thought that's a really good idea.
And I love that you said that it shows the journey of where that educator has come from to where they're going to as well. It's really nice sentiment. Yeah.
So actually, we're sort of moving into the question and answers component of the session. We did have a pre-submitted question related to this topic, which came from an educational leader in Victoria who asked, I often have new educators who feel overwhelmed by the prospect of programming and engaging in the cycle of planning, especially as they're working on their own in isolation. What tips or strategies can I put in place to help new educators feel supported and confident in their role as a family daycare educator? I'll throw it open, Nicole, Chamalee, Lyndall.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice you can offer here?
I'm happy to answer the question. Yeah.
Yep. Chamalee.
Yeah, I think here it is very important to make things simple and less complicated for new educators. To do this, I find formats and examples work well. I would also recommend that using observations from the educator's environment, and then the educational leader takes some initiative to do some initial documentation to start guiding the new educator. When things are coming from their environment, I think it's easy to make things more relatable. So I think it's important to support the educator to understand the fundamentals.
Nicole, thoughts?
My sort of thought went, being back to basics, I guess, knowing yourself again. So, your own beliefs, philosophy, if there's any theorists or anything that come through quite strongly for you to resonate with, and then also looking at the children that are starting off in your environment and looking at their interests and needs and incorporating that in. And also those templates and things like that are really important for support for educational leaders or coordinators to help with or provide. We also, within our toolkit, we also provide a Vision for Learning book, which was a book developed by our service, and it goes out in every new educator's pack. And that is just a basic book of templates that will last at least 3 to 6 months. It's the same templates over and over and over again, just to get the educator into a pattern of, I guess, the basic requirements for the program planning cycle, and also connecting the practices and principles into their programming as well as the outcomes. So it kind of has everything that educators need to meet the basic requirement, and it's not something that we say that they have to use, but it's a tool that we give them, and if they are struggling, they've just got that book of templates there to use for that first few months that can help them get into that pattern with documentation, as well as feeling confident that they're meeting the requirements for the programming.
Yeah, I think you said that before. I mean, around, I can't recall specifically what it was in reference to, but you're saying you're providing tools for educators that you're not necessarily prescribing that they need to use them, but you're providing tangible examples or templates of things that they can use to encourage that particular practice, which is really important. It goes to that, that sort of concept we were talking about earlier around, providing the actual tools and guiding and providing the support structures and making sure that they're in place, but not necessarily taking a top-down approach for making it a prescriptive requirement around how to do things, because part of the strength of family daycare is allowing educators to have, a sense of autonomy around their own educational program and practice. But also, again, back to the flip side, we need to make sure that the expectations about what requirements are there and having a benchmark for that, we need to make sure that they're in place as well. So it's sort of that balance, two sides to that. And, you both spoke about the fact that providing templates in those in these types of contexts is important. So I think that, again, it's about balancing, supporting and fostering the opportunities through setting expectations, providing a benchmark of what that could actually look like, but then having enough flexibility in allowing for some autonomy and freedom in how that's can be delivered in each individual educator setting. So that sort of wraps up the formal topics for today, but we did have a couple of questions that were submitted, and the first question comes from a coordinator in Queensland that asked, what are your thoughts on integrating digital technology in family daycare settings, and what might be the potential benefits or risks associated with its introduction?
Sure, I'm happy to go if you like. I think, probably 80% of our educators would use digital platforms at some time. We see the benefits of some digital technology use. I think it's just important to do your research, for each educators to do their research on what platforms or leaders, educational leaders, coordinators, whoever's going to be using the platform, that they actually do the research around that particular digital technology, and then do a risk assessment in what that might look like. So if it was an educator wanting to use digital technology, we might ask some questions around what that digital technology is like and what the potential risk factors are. And we might also get them to do some permission forms or some forms for families to actually have some engagement into that as well. So some conversations that happen, or some permission forms that are signed to say that parents are happy for that platform to be used for their children, and the types of things that it would be used for. And really just the same with coordinators when working with educators. If we're going to incorporate a new digital platform that we're going to put information on, how comfortable Are we as a coordination team that is a secure platform? What research have we done? What information can we share? And what are the views of our audience, the people that we'll be using it with, to actually bring that together. And then I guess if it's educators, that same kind of thing with the families. But I do think, the world that we're living, we are moving, we're quite digital in everything that we do now. There's apps and programs and platforms for most things. So I think just knowing the content, doing some research and being confident in using it yourself before you bring that to families or your colleagues or whoever you're bringing it.
Can I please add something to what Nicole said?
Yep.
Yeah. So if you want to look at benefits or risk, I suggest the services do a SWOT analysis, and based on findings, the services will be able to make a more informed decisions, looking at the whole service perspective, whole service approach.
Yeah, that's a good point. I was wondering, thinking about the quite specific risks, but actually the strategies in analysing what those risks are really important as well. I mean, how to go about analysing those risks. So doing a SWOT analysis is, it's a well-established tool to and obviously it would work in a range of different contexts. I mean, the specific risks around that, around permissions, privacy and security and things like that. And we're talking about digital platforms where I guess we're mainly speaking about the from an educator perspective, it's around that documentation, documentation of children's learning and sharing with parents and things like that. Is that what we're mainly referring to when you said 80% of educators use digital platforms, Nicole?
Yes, with our educators, I think, yes, some of them are using those digital platforms for sharing information. And there are a range of platforms. So, our database, even where we sign children in and out, it's a digital platform, I guess, in a sense. So I think we are becoming more digital in most things that we do. So just doing those risk assessments or risk analysis of how that looks and how families, what families know about it, or educators know about it, or colleagues know about it, just that shared information is really important as well.
So we did have another question come through from Joanne, who's an educational leader in Queensland. Joanne asked, how do you support educators over a large geographical area? I think we touched on it somewhat, but I think it's good. It's good to tackle it specifically. So, what are your thoughts around, services that are, we know that family daycare generally is, it's either it's conducted at residences or venues. But what about those services that are really have those large geographic areas to contend with?
So sorry, the question again was.
How do you support educators over a large geographical area?
I think with our service, we would look at what is in our limit, like in our capacity, how far can we go? I think we have about probably 4 hours drive between our educators at sort of both ends, I guess. So if we were going to drive from our furthest educator, one way to our furthest educator, the other way, we would have about a 4 hour, maybe a bit over drive. So what is the capacity around the area that you work within or service? And then what sorts of things, if it's not possible to get, I guess, visits and things done, is it within the capacity? Is there other means of or ways of doing that? We do try and visit our educators regularly, and as a face-to-face visit. We tend not to use, FaceTime visits or things like that. We obviously did some of that in COVID, back when visiting was a little bit harder, but we do generally try and get out and do visits face-to-face. But I think there's lots of ways in which you could support educators in other ways of face-to-face if it is within the capacity of your service to be able to do that with their, again, those digital things, even emails, depending on what sorts of databases or platforms that your service uses, and the types of information that can be shared virtually as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. Really, a service should be looking to its own capacity. While there are options that educational leaders in particular could implement to support educators in their day-to-day practice and improving their skills in critical reflection or whatever it might be, for a service from an educational leadership perspective, I guess, speaking to that, reflecting on the service's own capacity to meet the needs of educators, but also fulfill those obligations, because there are things that can be, as you said, Nicole, there are other ways of supporting educators that don't require physical visits, but physical visits by coordinators are also necessary in a variety of different contexts. So for a service to actually assess their own capacity, but I guess that's what's challenging, sort of, one of the challenges that Joanne's speaking to, and what we're talking about, and what's come through the ACCC inquiry, the Productivity Commission's draft report around what we've all known for a long, long time, and finally getting the spotlight shone back on the sector in terms of its potential to service thin markets or regional areas or underserved or unserved markets. But in order for a service to provide a high quality service, which involves focusing on continuous improvement and the importance of educational leadership, to do that well over, to cater for those areas appropriately, and what Joanne's sort of speaking to, those services that are inherently facing bigger challenges in their capacity to physically service those visits. I think it's a big challenge, and I'd probably contend that services for family daycare, to meet its potential for those services to be able to cater for the needs of educators in those regional areas or large geographic areas, that we probably need to the government to consider that more support is required to support family daycare approved services, to engage more educators in those areas of need across large geographic areas. Was there any other final points before I wrap it up? Did you want to say anything?
I guess I did have educators spread across a large geographical area in my service. I had 90 educators across, 3 different areas. So, and I didn't get around to visiting them every day, every week. I relied upon the coordinators, I guess, to get photos for me. They would then put it onto a program, which I think we were using OneNote. They would just upload all these photos of programs. They would take pages and pages and pages of it for me, and then I would sit down as the educational leader and read through those, and either give the response back to the coordinator on how they could support that educator, or send it off to them individually with tips on where to grow with their programming practice. And then I guess I developed my own programming book as well. It had critical reflection questions in it, so that they wouldn't have to rely on critical reflection coming purely from me. The questions were, would you play with you as an educator? Different personal questions about their personal growth as well as their professional growth as well. So, I guess it's the different avenues that you can put in place that the educator can take, and then have those discussions with their coordinators on those visits, and then that gets fed back to you as the education leader for you to reflect upon as well.
Yeah. It's a neat way of bringing it back to the focus of what today's topic is from an educational leader context. How, which is one person in a service. In most services, it might be a role that's shared, but the requirement is that there is one educational leader. And what you're saying, Lyndall, sort of speaks to two things for me from the educational leadership point of view, is that they would need to leverage other staff potentially in this coordinated visits. And that's important because putting the lens, like you said, of collecting photos and feeding back through to the educational leader, from a family daycare perspective, it's a really sensible way of, of collecting evidence or for what you might need to do in your role as an educational leader. Is really, you would have to rely to some extent on other coordinators to either be dispersing the information outwards or for them to be feeding that back into you. But the other point you're saying, again, sort of is around leveraging technology to potentially do that as well. So there are opportunities for educational leaders to ensure that what they need to do in these sort of dispersed family daycare model can be done in a centralized way by leveraging the strengths of the model in terms of things like, the fact that coordinators may do more regular visits than the one individual educational leader across an entire service. So I'll wrap it up there. I know that it's sort of gone a little bit over what our projected time was. I would like to say a big thank you again to Chamalee and Nicole for giving up their time, and also thanks to you, Lyndall, for supporting the discussion from both your sort of background and expertise in this area, but also, from that sort of co-hosting perspective. Thank you to everyone in the audience for joining us. As always, don't forget, if you want to go back and view today's episode again, it will be available to all FDCA members via the FDCA Member Zone. And of course, we look forward to seeing everyone at the next FDCA Online Engagement Series episode, which will be held on October 17th. And funnily enough, we'll be covering the topic of critical reflection. But for now, thank you again and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Michael. Thank you. Thanks, Lyndall.
Thank you.